Welcome to the public unveiling of the report of the Commission on Evidence-Based Policymaking. My name is Ron Haskins, and I co-chaired the Commission. We're pleased that all of you could be here with us today as we present our final report to the legislators that championed the Commission into existence, House Speaker Paul Ryan and Senator Patty Murray. We'll hear from both of them in just a minute. The Commission was established by the Bipartisan Evidence-Based Policymaking Commission Act of 2016, which was jointly sponsored by Speaker Ryan and Senator Murray and signed into law on March 30th, 2016. The legislation directed the appointment of 15 commissioners with a broad range of expertise, including academic researchers, data expert, seasoned administrators — I don't think the word seasoned was in the statute — and experts in computer science, data privacy, and privacy law. The Commission was provided just over 1 year to study and develop a strategy for strengthening government's evidence building and policymaking efforts. Specifically, the Act directed the Commission to study how the data that government already collects — I stress, already collects — can be used to improve government programs and policies. A prime insight of the Ryan Murray team was that we already have mountains of data that contain new insights that creative researchers can unleash, and that can provide us with an inexpensive and reliable source of information that will help us evaluate our social programs. Look in Appendix D of the report to see a list of these data sets. They're extremely impressive. Considerations such as these caused Speaker Ryan to claim that this is not just another commission. It is part of a sea change in how we solve problems. He also asserted that the Commission was expected to provide the tools to make better decisions and achieve better results, and we took that charge very seriously. Our findings and our accompanying 22 recommendations for fundamentally improving the federal government's evidence-building systems and capabilities are documented in our final report entitled The Promise of Evidence-Based Policymaking that we are releasing today. Now I want to talk briefly about how the Commission operated, in part to set the stage for remarks of the Commission Chair, Catherine Abraham, here on my left, and I should have said probably the spectacular chair of the Commission, who in a moment will share highlights from our Commission recommendations. First, the bipartisan legislation resulted in a bipartisan commission. Spanning the 15 commissioners, there is not only a huge range of expertise, but we have commissioners who were appointed by leading Republicans and Democrats in Congress and the White House, and the Commission includes individuals who have served as senior leaders in both Democratic and Republican administrations. Second, we undertook an exhaustive fact-finding effort before sitting down to put pen to paper on any recommendation. The fact-finding phase extended for a full 8 months and included 7 public meetings, 3 public hearings to get the views of anyone who believed they had a message for the Commission. We invited all of them and listened to them talk. In fact, we were so intent that we held the hearings in Washington, D.C., Chicago, and San Francisco so people from other parts of the country would have an easier time getting there. We issued a request for comments through the Federal Register. We conducted a survey of federal offices that generate or use evidence. Overall, we received input from more than 500 individuals or organizations. We also had commissioners with an impressive range of expertise related to data, research, and program evaluation, as well as a huge range of perspectives on anything you could think of. All of these sources of input about the current state of federal government's capacity to both generate and apply evidence to improve programs and policies was invaluable as the Commission developed recommendations precisely to strengthen those capacities. Many factors helped us complete our work, but 2 stand out. First, at the outset of our work together, the Commission developed a set of 5 guiding principles that shaped our recommendations and that we believe should serve as guiding principles for evidence-based policymaking as a whole. Here are the principles. The first one is privacy. Privacy and confidentiality must be respected in the generation and use of data and evidence. Rigor. Evidence should be developed using well-designed and well-implemented methods tailored to the questions being asked. Transparency. Those engaged in generating and using data and evidence should operate transparently, providing channels for public input and comment, and ensuring the evidence produced is made publicly available. Next, previously thought to be impossible to achieve in Washington, D.C., humility. Care should be taken not to overgeneralize from findings that may be specific to a particular study or context. And capacity. The capacity to generate and use data and evidence should be integrated within government institutions and adequately funded and staffed. The second vital factor that helped us produce a good report on time was our collective commitment to the task we were given by the Congress and the President. This commitment helped us create our vision. Here it is. The Commission envisions a future in which rigorous evidence is created efficiently as a routine part of government operations and used to construct and evaluate public policy. We engaged in vigorous debates about the right path to achieve this future, but in doing so, we learned from fellow commissioners who had expertise in areas different than our own. The result is a final report and a final set of recommendations that are endorsed by all 15 commissioners. We're able to produce a report and recommendations supported by the entire commission, not only because we shared a vision, but because we listened carefully to each other, and above all, we were willing to compromise. There are many issues in our country that generate differing views, and we're all immensely pleased that the need for more and better evidence and our strategy for getting there in a privacy-protective way was unanimously approved by members of the Commission. Generating and using evidence to inform government policymaking and program administration is not a partisan issue. As the legislative co-sponsor, Senator Patty Murray, said, whether you think we need more government or less government, you should agree that we should at least have better government. The Commission believes that the adoption of the recommendations contained in our report will prove transformational and will lead to a significant increase in the volume of high-quality evidence that is available to inform policymakers. On behalf of the entire Commission, I thank House Speaker Paul Ryan and Senator Patty Murray for their highly effective and bipartisan work in developing the legislation that created the Commission and their continuing commitment to evidence-based policymaking that will help implement our recommendations. So enough of this talk about Speaker Ryan and Senator Murray. Let's turn the mic over to them. I give you Speaker Ryan.
All right. Thank you, Ron. Appreciate it. You sound like a senator.
Remember the House.
Yeah, I know you are. First of all, I want to welcome Patty to this opportunity to work together, just like I want to welcome her team to Lambeau Field this Sunday. Yeah, we're very excited about the rematch. Yeah, right. Yeah. We trash talk each other a lot on this stuff. I want to thank all the members of the commission. Really appreciate this. This is a phenomenal piece of work. We asked them to do a lot of work in a fairly short period of time, and they did an outstanding job. I'm thrilled today to be here to be a part of releasing this report. This is impressive, important work. Now, this report will help fulfill the desire that the American people have for an efficient and effective federal government. Who's against that? This report sets forth a vision that which in rigorous evidence is used to inform and shape public policy at all levels, from Congress to our executive agencies. And we can get greater use of existing data while strengthening privacy and legal protections for citizens and providing them with the greater transparency on how the data the federal government collects is actually used. Now, I admit you don't often see the two of us standing up here together. It's about every 2 or 3 years we do something. But I think it's high time we just agree where we agree and go and agree. And that's something that we're trying to do a little bit more of these days. Why did we think this was important? Why did we set aside our partisan differences that so often prevail around here? It is because right now, if you were born poor 50 years ago, you were as likely to stay poor today as you were then. We've made some progress, but not nearly enough. It's because taxpayers deserve to know that their money is being spent wisely. It's because we need to make sure that we actually reward results and not just effort. The Commission has provided us with a set of specific recommendations that will help us develop the tools to know what is working and what is not working. It sounds so simple, but it's just not what we've been doing for a long time. So we now have the expertise, the idea for legal protections, and the technology to do this. So I'm very proud to work with you, Patty. I'm very proud of the commissioners, all the work that you've done. We will now be working with our colleagues in the House and the Senate on legislation to do this, to improve access to data, to improve privacy, and to help expand our capacity to improve programs. So that is what this is all about. It's about changing our approach so that we can actually change the status quo and improve people's lives. That's why we're doing this. I see a lot of people who've been a big instrumental part of this work, and I want to thank you all for your involvement in this. And we really look forward to executing this policy so that we can get the kind of results that we all want to achieve. So with this, I'd love to introduce my friend, Patty Murray. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we look forward to being at Lambeau Field on Sunday. I want to thank Speaker Ryan. It's really been his vision and push and willingness to work in a bipartisan way that brings us here today. And I really want to commend you and thank you for that. It's great to work with you. And I want to thank Ron and Catherine and really the entire commission for everything they have done to pull together this really fantastic report. You know, people across the country haven't been looking at Congress in recent years and thinking to themselves, wow, these people are getting a lot done. And they certainly aren't looking at what is happening here and thinking, wow, they're making a whole lot of evidence-based decision-making. Well, as all of you know, after the government shutdown back in 2013, and after Speaker Ryan and I worked together on a 2-year budget deal to pause the chaos and dysfunction, we wanted to keep working to address these issues. We wanted to show people that bipartisan work was possible and necessary, even in often two-partisan times. And we wanted to do what we could to give government the tools it needed to work smarter and better for the people it is supposed to serve. And that is why I was so happy to work with Speaker Ryan on this legislation, creating this commission, and it is why I am so excited about the report that is going to be released today. And here's why I am passionate about evidence-based policymaking and why I think this work is important. Because no matter what any of us think about government in general, and no matter what we think about programs or investments in particular, surely we should be able to agree that we should do everything we can to make sure that they work as well as possible, not just because we wish them to, and not just letting blind ideology or partisanship guide the way or undermine policies that help people, but by using evidence, facts, science, making sure our policies are aligned with what we actually know works and what doesn't. And not just out of respect for those who are being served, government's customers, though that is critical, but also out of respect for citizens who put their faith in policymakers to get this right. And it's not just about dollars and cents, it's about hope and trust, and policymakers owing it to the people we represent to rigorously examine and continuously improve our government and its programs. Now, we've made some progress on this front, especially in some of our recent bipartisan deals we've done on workforce investment and K-12 education and substance use and addiction. But, you know, we got a long way to go, and the federal government needs to do a lot more. So I'm very excited to be here today for the release of this report. The Commission put together some fantastic ideas for helping policymakers see the pieces of what is out there when it comes to evidence, information, and policies, and then link them together. The recommendations they've pulled together to both increase access to data and improve the security and confidentiality of that data, as well as expand the capacity to turn that data into evidence, would go a long way towards helping us as policymakers do better by the people we serve. The Commission has done a great job mapping the infrastructure, process, and laws already in place, the ecosystem, and proposing ways to strengthen, streamline, and facilitate what is already in place. And I'm especially glad that this expert and diverse group of members, diverse in political views and in professional experience, delivered us a report supported by all 15 members. That is a real tribute. Unanimous recommendations from a bipartisan commission in Washington, D.C. right now is a very rare thing. So thank you all for that. It is really a testament to their commitment to this mission and to Catherine and Ron's leadership in particular. So I really want to thank all of you. But a report is only as good as the work that comes out of it. So I'm really glad to be here today with Speaker Ryan to make it clear this is not the end of this story. It is now the beginning. We are working on legislation, and we hope to introduce it soon to turn several of the nearly 24 recommendations into law and lay down a foundation for more work to come. These initial recommendations, part of the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, represent important down payments on three main areas of recommendations: expanding access, modernizing privacy, and strengthening the capacity for evaluation. The down payment legislation will make sure we make immediate progress while we hear from our constituents and stakeholders, and while we work with the commissioners and committees of jurisdiction on the remaining recommendations. In addition, I am pleased the Bipartisan Policy Center, led by its president, Jason Gourmet, who's here with us today, has enlisted Catherine and Ron to lead a BPC initiative that will continue the work of this commission. It was really important to me and the speaker to have that capacity in place as the commission ends its work this month. And I'm very happy that Jason and the BPC have stepped up to do this. I really appreciate it. So thank you again to everyone for all the work you have done. And I commit to you that I will continue working as hard as I can by your side and doing everything I can to bring our colleagues on both sides of the aisle along with us. We may not always agree on much these days, but I am hoping that evidence-based policymaking will be a ray of light in often too dark times. So thank you all again for your tremendous work, and Speaker Ryan, it's an honor to be here with you.
Okay, good. So thank you for those remarks, Speaker Ryan and Senator Murray. We're so pleased that you could be here with us today. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce yet another great supporter of evidence-based policymaking, Dr. Catherine Abraham. Catherine chairs the commission, and she has done a terrific and wonderful job wrangling the commission over the past year. And when I say wrangle, I mean, of course, with velvet gloves. Catherine.
Thank you, Ron. And thank you to everyone for being here with us today as we release the report of the Commission on Evidence-Based Policymaking. Before I make a few remarks, I would like to give a bound copy of this report. Well, I'm impressed you had it printed out.
It was cheap, you know.
So, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Catherine.
much.
Really appreciate it.
So-
Thanks for that. I can do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
So, I want to just make a few remarks about the substantive content of the report and some of our recommendations. All of us, of course, are here today because we believe that the American people deserve a government that functions efficiently and addresses responsibly the challenges that face our country. But for government to perform as it should, policymakers need to have good information about how programs and policies operate, about what works and what doesn't, to guide their decisions about improving government programs and policies. In establishing the commission, the Congress rightly acknowledged that today, in too many cases, too little evidence is produced to meet this important need. The commission was charged to develop a strategy for increasing the availability and use of data in order to build evidence about government programs while also protecting privacy and confidentiality. As Ron's already mentioned, the members of the commission have been motivated by a vision of the future in which rigorous evidence is created efficiently as a routine part of government operations and used to construct effective public policy. The recommendations in our report are intended to move us towards making that vision a reality. Traditionally, increasing access to confidential data presumed that a significant increase in the risk that individual privacy would be compromised. And I think it's important to say that that is a presumption that we as a commission have rejected. As this is described in the commission's report, there are steps that can be taken to improve data security and protections for privacy beyond what exists today while increasing the production of evidence to inform policy. We think we can have our cake and eat it too. But seriously, modern technology and statistical methods combined with transparency and a strong legal framework do create the opportunity to use data for evidence building in ways that were not possible in the past. Ron has described our extensive fact-finding process. through which we all came to understand better the barriers to the effective use of government data to generate evidence. Our report includes 22 recommendations designed to address these barriers. They fall into 3 broad categories. First, modernizing and strengthening the privacy protections for data used in evidence building. Second, improving data access for approved evidence building projects. And third, strengthening the federal government's capacity for evidence building. I would like to highlight just a few of the recommendations that fall under each of these 3 broad categories. First, one of the things that the Commission was charged with doing was to evaluate if and how to create a clearinghouse for program and survey data to support federal program evaluation and policy. The Commission considered the idea of establishing a data clearhouse in the sense of a data warehouse where large amounts of linked data are accumulated and stored and available for anyone who wants to come in and look at them to do so. And we rejected the idea of such a clearinghouse on the grounds that we believed it could raise substantial risks for privacy. What we have recommended instead is a service to facilitate the linking of relevant data on an as-needed basis for approved statistical projects to inform federal programs and policies. So data would come in, they would be used for a project. When the project is concluded, the linked data file would be destroyed. So we would not be accumulating a bigger and bigger store of individual level data at this service. We've named this service, we're not super creative, so we've named this service the National Secure Data Service, and if someone can come up with a better name, I would happily buy you a beer. But for now, the National Secure Data Service would be created by bringing together and building on existing resources within the government. The service would facilitate secure access to government data by qualified researchers inside and outside of government, and especially to data sets that are created by linking information from multiple agencies. In addition to supporting secure access to confidential data in a setting that meets stringent data protection standards, the service would also develop state-of-the-art methods to safely combine data for evidence building and support the application of cutting-edge privacy protective approaches and technology that could be applied across the government. Together with the establishment of the National Secure Data Service, the Commission also recommends in the area of access changes to law as needed to ensure that administrative data that have value for evidence building purposes can be accessed through the service. Throughout its deliberations, the Commission prioritized consideration of privacy. I have not done this myself, but I was told that if you search the report for the word privacy, that it appears 408 times. Protecting privacy has been a priority for federal evidence building for many decades. But over the course of our fact-finding, it became clear to us that government practices must adapt to new threats and take better advantage of emerging technologies for protecting data. We believe that through law and policy, it is possible to ensure that federal departments are consistently adopting the most up-to-date methods to protect data used for evidence building. The Commission's recommendations with respect to enhancing privacy specifically include requiring that when de-identified confidential data are being considered for release, that a comprehensive risk assessment be conducted before that is done so that data can be better protected and risk appropriately managed. Adopting modern privacy-enhancing technologies for protecting confidential data used for evidence building, and codifying policies for maintaining the integrity and objectivity of federal statistics in order to promote continued trust in the accuracy of information that's used to guide government decision-making. As important as we believe improved access to data and strengthened privacy protections are, on their own, they will not improve the volume and quality of evidence. To do that, it's essential that the evidence-building community within the federal government have sufficient capacity and sufficient administrative flexibility to carry out the work of effectively generating the evidence that policymakers require. To strengthen the capacity of the evidence-building community within the federal government, we have a number of recommendations. These include identifying or establishing a chief evaluation officer in each department to coordinate evaluation, policy, and research. Establishing a senior agency official for data policy with responsibility access to data and stewardship of departments' data resources for evidence building. Where we exist, we believe that the heads of the existing federal statistical agencies likely would be the right people for this role. We recommend that federal departments develop learning agendas to support the generation and use of evidence to address the full range of policymakers' questions. We recommend improving the coordination government-wide of evidence building by directing the Office of Management and Budget to facilitate cross-government coordination and consider how a greater commitment to foundational information policy responsibilities can be achieved, including through any required consolidation or reorganization at OMB. We recommend aligning administrative processes with evidence-building activities, including processes related to the clearance of information collections and the procurement of services for evidence building. And finally, we recommend ensuring that sufficient resources are available to support evidence building activities. That's a lot of recommendations. I've really given you the highlights, the details of our vision for the future and how all these pieces would work and fit together are laid out in our report. We hope, of course, that these recommendations will be implemented expeditiously, and we very much look forward to partnering with the Congress and the administration in whatever way possible to advance the recommendations of the Commission in a future built on evidence-based policymaking. So, Ron?
Thank you, Catherine. I think it's where I'm supposed to announce that we only have an hour and 15 minutes to go. Catherine, what? We need chairs. We need chairs. You can't have chairs. You got to learn to suck it up. Catherine and I want to acknowledge, and I think a lot of people in this room, I see congressional staffers around, know that behind every good deed in the Congress, there is a staff. And we had a magnificent staff, and we want to recognize all the members of our staff. Without them, we would have been in trouble. And we also want to recognize the staff that really helped us make this possible, and that's John Reiter from Senator Murray's staff and Ted McCann from the Speaker's staff. They both worked closely with us. They testified in our first hearing, and they really made a big difference. So now, questions. Here's the way we're going to handle it. If anybody has a question, raise your hand. I'll recognize you. You can say who you are and what you represent, and then the what you represent part, real light on that. And ask a question, and I'll figure out who's going to answer the question. This will be a chance for you to meet the members of the Commission as well. So who's going to answer the first question? Yes.
Hi, I'm Mohana Ravindranath. I'm a reporter with NextGov. I was just curious where you see the greatest opportunity to work with the private sector, maybe how businesses can help out with evidence-based decision-making, policy-making.
I think I'm going to ask Bob to answer that question, since he has the most general knowledge and is a businessman in disguise already.
So the Commission doesn't opine on the implementation of ideas to bring in private sector data to enhance the quality of federal statistics and evidence-based policy. It notes, however, that as time goes on, the volume and the richness of those data is increasing, often faster than the resources in the federal government. So it's something that we judged was somewhat outside the scope of the Commission, but the spirit of your question warms the hearts of many of the commissioners.
Next question. Yes. Right here. Okay. Here, coming right there. It's coming right there.
So, Jason with the BPC, I want to congratulate you on reaching a consensus one thing that we find in a number of projects is that people believe consensus is a gentle art practiced by collaborative people with really few principles at all. In our experience, it's an act of constructive intellectual warfare where people of goodwill have real collisions of ideas. And I guess I'd be interested if you could reveal a little bit about what were some of the harder issues to reach agreement on, because I imagine those are the places where the Congress is also going to grapple with trying to come up with legislation.
By the way, I should say that first answer to the question was given by Bob Groves, a former head of the Census Bureau, and now the provost at George Washington. I would like the person to answer that. Oh, I'm sorry, Georgetown. I only learned there was a difference yesterday, so. All right, so I want to you like that? You can tell he's out of state. So the person to answer that question by far the best is Catherine, because she is the one that did the most of anybody on the commission to promote agreement and compromise. So Catherine.
I thought you were going to take that one, Ron. Well, I mean, I spent an awful lot of time talking about issues related to privacy. We think we've come up with an approach to expanding access to data that also can improve the protections afforded in terms of privacy and confidentiality, and that's all laid out in the report. But exactly what we were going to say about how much access there should be to data was something that we spent a lot of time talking about. And you can see that, I think, in the discussion in the report. So I think that was the thing that we had the most intellectual engagement around of all of the interesting topics we discussed.
Yeah, no conflict. No conflict, but lots of long faces and people going, looking at, you know. Next question.
George Washington University. You spent most of your time on the infrastructure and the problems of capacity and developing data and evidence, but it appears you haven't addressed very much the questions of policy design and the design of policy-making processes that could be adjusted to make better use of evidence. Did you give any thought to that in your deliberations, or is that a task for some other group?
Okay, let's see. Who am I going to ask to answer that easy little question? I think I'll ask Robert Shea, former senior official at OMB.
I used to work for Steve, so thanks, Steve. We actually focused on the governance of the creation of evidence and its use mostly in agencies. So we think we've designed an infrastructure that can establish a routine way of deciding what are the main questions we want to ask, how will we go about getting the evidence to answer those questions, and then use that in the decision-making process at agencies. I'm excited that this group will stay together in some capacity to continue to push that exact question, how will this be injected into policy? I mean, we're talking about really unlocking a treasure trove of data, and that hopefully results in a great deal more evidence that can then be used in the policymaking process. We're a long way from just that first step, so this is the beginning of a long journey, full employment for Ron and Catherine for many years to go.
Yes, and no vacations. Next question. Robert Moore, I know that guy.
AI. That's right. So I'm looking at recommendation 2.6 and 2.7, and 2.6 is a pretty strong one about quarterly earnings. And I'm just curious, who is Congress and the President to direct the states to provide that data to? Is it the service or is it some other entity? And then once it's provided to them, is it available? Who's it available to? Or what's your vision of that?
I have no idea, but Ken Trotsky from the University of Kentucky does.
Wow.
So I think the commission was trying to be very thoughtful and careful about not stepping sort of outside the bounds of what we thought our role was. Clearly, when you start talking about unemployment insurance data on unemployment insurance and data that it resides at states, it's a difficult balance to try to figure out the appropriate role, how the federal government interacts with the states in providing that data. So I think we were trying to be careful in thinking about making it recognizing that it's important that those data are part of the infrastructure, but not prescribing for federal officials and state officials exactly the structure that should be the best structure to set up to get those data into the system. It's clear that those data are very important for doing this type of analysis, but I'm not sure that we're the right people to tell Congress how to go about doing that.
And does that apply also to the direction in 2.7 about state-collected administrative data? That you want it gathered and brought somewhere and more of it, but how that gets worked out is left unsaid.
I would say that that's, both of the programs that you're talking about, the programs you're referring to are clearly programs that receive both federal and state support. And it's important to recognize, it's also important to recognize that states operate under significant constraints when trying to figure out the best way to collect and provide that data. And so we wanted to ensure that, yes, all of those data, it's recognized that those data are important for policymaking, vital for policymaking.
If I could add just one thing to that, I thought during several discussions that the feeling was that at first there was some suggestion, tell the states they have to do it, because the federal government pays for at least half of the program, and in some cases, like food stamps, as you know very well, they pay 100% of the benefit. So it seems like we should have access to the data. But I think eventually the commission came to think that we want to work this out on a cooperative basis with the states. That's the way the federal government should do it. And we shouldn't try to demand things. We should work it out. And in the long run, that we'll get a better result if we do it that way. Next question. Yes, in the back there.
Hi, I'm Meredith Summers. I'm with Federal News Radio. Thank you guys very much for your time today. If there are a couple, out of all those really good recommendations, are there a couple that are the best or the ones that are, I'm not really sure how to word this. I have to write it out because despite the fact that I'm a radio reporter, I get nervous asking questions. Initially, my question was, okay, sharing and securing and organizing data can sometimes be tough for the government. And so you have this big book with amazing recommendations, but what are we actually likely going to see? And so then my other question was, if you had to pick a couple to be like, please just get these done, what would they be?
I know the answer, but I am going to let Bruce Meyer tell you what it is.
No easy questions. I think that if you asked different people, different commissioners, you'd get different answers on that. And there are different things that you would first pick to strengthen privacy. There are different things that you'd pick to improve capacity and different recommendations that you would point to improve access. And let me leave it at that.
Good idea.
Next question, and then the one after this one, someone please ask a privacy question. We really need to talk about privacy. Yes, right there.
Well, I think it's my role to ask the privacy question.
Oh, good.
I'm Mark Rodenberg with the Electronic Privacy Information Center. I actually want to commend the commission. I saw a draft of the report earlier today, and I was really quite taken by the depth with which the commission looked at privacy issues, made proactive recommendations. I particularly like this phrase, solely statistical purposes. And I'm assuming that if data is not used solely for statistical purposes, there will be appropriate criminal penalties. Still looking in the report for that. But actually, I did want to ask this question, which I know I'd raised at one point, because I spoke before the commission. I couldn't quite tell if this issue was addressed by the commission. It seems a timely question to ask. I remember saying that there are a lot of government databases that do contain personal data that obviously implicate privacy interests, and if you're going to gather that data, there could be privacy consequences unless you have adequate safeguards. But I also said to the commission that there are many government databases that implicate privacy not at all. And here's a very timely example of that. So the United States today is looking at a near catastrophic situation regarding two hurricanes that are heading toward our coast, Irma and I guess Josie afterward. And it turns out that the European models for hurricane tracking are more accurate than the US models for hurricane tracking. Climate data as a general matter, and the data that's obtained by NOAA as a general matter, has no privacy implications as far as I know whatsoever. And if we were talking about evidence-based policy based on government data, my instinct would be to say, are we doing everything we possibly can to make that type of data widely available, build upon it, innovate, produce better decisions? So on the one hand, I truly want to commend the Commission for doing, I think, a very good job with the privacy issue. I've been reading these reports for many years. I think this is one of the best. But at the same time, to ask you if you actually did think seriously about evidence-based policy where there is simply no trade-off, where we actually need to be doing more than we're currently doing. We should not be relying on European models when hurricanes are battering the coast of the United States.
I want to remind people in the audience, we had 15 commissioners. 5 of them were appointed specifically to deal with privacy. And I realize that your question is not directly about privacy, but I'd like one of the 5 commissioners that was really important in the commission in establishing the privacy positions. What, you said there are 500 uses the word or something like that?
408.
408. And that's LaTanya Sweeney from Harvard, where there's hard to miss.
Oh, well, it's a tremendous compliment to get from Mark a statement that if that's the privacy question Mark Rodenberg has to ask, we did a heck of a job with privacy. And I'll just leave it at that.
Oh, you want to add something? Yeah.
So one of the things you said, Mark, is absolutely true. I know we focused on the most sensitive data. We spent most of our time on that. But actually, some of the features of this National Secure Data Service steal ideas from non-confidential data. So the Earth Grid Federation that contains the global climate data is really a model that looks very similar to our notion. No data are stored centrally. Data are globally available through access and heavy control of who's accessing for what purpose. So they were ahead of us, I think, on how to do this and how to do it securely to maximize the informational value, but still maintain control over data sets.
I would just add one other thing, too, is some of the report talks a lot about a tiered access model and the idea of doing a risk assessment and making that public, giving transparency to the decision-making of whether a group holds back a data set or produces a data set. And in that regard, the idea of holding back a data set, that there are no privacy reasons, I think it does support that, even though that's a little, not an example you'll find in the report.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to add one more thing. I think one of the reasons why you see the report talking about certain kinds of data more than others, and you give a good example, is the Commission was really focused on trying to identify the places where we thought we were really very much behind and really had opportunities to try to expand access, and there are a lot of issues around linkages between different sort of siloed data sources that we saw a big opportunity for leveraging this treasure trove of data towards doing more evidence-based policymaking. But another issue I think that comes up that might speak to the question that you have is the recommendations around the infrastructure building within agencies around trying to promote more evaluation. which in some sense speaks to the question that you have about the data being there and wanting to leverage that for more use. And part of that has to do with resources, and part of that has to do with trained personnel in order to, the capacity of the trained personnel in order to do more of the evaluation.
Okay, one more question. Yes, right up here in front. Well, wait till you get the mic.
I'm a reporter with Tax Notes, Zoe Sagalow. I was just curious if you have any ideas for how evidence-based policymaking could be used in tax reform, one of the main things that Congress is looking to do.
Who can answer that question? Tax question.
The co-chair.
Sure. This is getting a little bit into the weeds, but one thing that we can't do right now is put together a good measure of income to look at, say, the distributional effects of a policy change, like a change in the tax code, or to simulate the effects of a tax reform. And some of the proposals in the commission report would make it easier to link survey and tax and program data so that you could get a better picture of the American people and do better simulations of tax reform.
Okay, I was just kidding about the last question. Somebody here from Science, distinguished journal, we got to ask a question. Jeff Mervis.
Thank you. You talked about next steps, and I don't know if Jason or one of the members of the commission wants to deal with it. What role do you see yourself playing? I mean, the Speaker and Senator Murray talked about legislation. Do you hope to be advising them on that? Do you hope to be a resource once they set up a steering committee? How do you see your afterlife contributing to what you want to achieve?
I'm going to give a brief answer, and then Catherine's going to give a long answer. We have a big problem. We've already talked about how crucial the staff was. We're going to lose the staff completely because of the way the commission is funded. Now, I don't think any of them are going to die immediately, but they all have real jobs, and they have to work at those jobs, so they're not going to be available. I think we're both scheduled for like 27 speeches over the next, or participation in panels and so forth, over the next 2 or 3 months. In fact, we have one next year. So that will go on for quite a while. And then we've already mentioned the Bipartisan Policy Center is going to more or less quarterback a whole series of activities, including meetings. How exactly we influence the legislation, I was worked for a Ways and Means Committee for 15 years. And I was in the White House for a year, so I have a lot of experience in this, and it's really hard to predict how that's going to happen. The first time out of the box, we've worked, especially the staff has worked on this, and as the Speaker said, it will be introduced in both the House and the Senate. It's been bipartisan. It's been very enjoyable. From everything I've understood, there have been no major conflicts. So I think we're going to get that first bill, but that first bill, there are a lot of provisions that are really difficult that are not going to be in that bill. So exactly how that shapes up, I don't know. I still know a lot of people on the Hill. Catherine knows a lot of people. We have other people on the commission who have influence on the Hill. So we're going to push for it. But in the end, it's the members of Congress and especially their staffs that are really going to shape this, and we'll be available to advise them. So I call that a half a plan. All right, so thank you, everybody, for coming. We really enjoyed having you here, and we all, I think, I'm confident in saying we all greatly enjoyed the privilege of working on the commission and getting to know each other very well. And we're going to hang out here for a little while in case any of you want to ask questions in private. So thank you very much for coming. That's great.